sticking to the steps agreed, but instead of a fallback?
We're behind the 7 steps plan, but what if the Iraqis don't go along with that bit or that bit of it? Are we thinking about alternative routes? And on both occasions, in July and on this occasion in September, I was given a very direct and peremptory message from Bremer that I was to stick to the 7 steps plan. This was what had been decided. This was the mission. This would be accomplished. And I was to support it. So I turned to some other subject with Colin Powell and decided to see how things played out. But so these were early...
Not his deputy, he was issuing instructions to you?
Yes. And I was trying to suggest that there was a political discussion to be had. So in a situation like that, you take a step back, you consider what's happened, and you decide how you exercise your influence on the next occasion, or how you put in your thoughts about the political process, and whatever I was concentrating on, in the next round of conversation.
But he was not receptive to your advice. You were there as a very senior person, outranking him actually in your own diplomatic career, and you were there to offer him advice, and when you offered him advice, he was telling you that you were to accept the order and that was it, not to raise points of this kind, even in a small conversation with himself and Colin Powell.
That was the outward and immediate effect, yes, that he didn't want to hear suggestions about how to complete a satisfactory political process that were different from what the president had decided.
And did that take into account the involvement of Iraqis, because he was, pressing ahead? Did he engage effectively with the Iraqi people?
It didn't take account of 2 things. One was that, and already in June, Ayatollah Sistani had issued a fatwa, a religious decree, against part of the 7 steps plan, which was having a constitution before there were elections, which was Ambassador Bremer's clear view of where he wanted to go. So Ambassador Bremer already knew that there was Iraqi resistance to the 7 steps plan, and as I understood it at that point, his reaction was to drive harder with the plan that he had. There was also something called the CPA Vision for Iraq, which was written down, which I thought didn't amount to a clear enough mission statement, actually, for the coalition in Iraq, as we might come to later, but which was a vision for Iraq and was publicly available to Iraqis. That made it clear that some flexibility, adaptation in the coalition's approaches might well be necessary. But that was not the message that I got from Ambassador Bremer in that particular conversation.
And do you think that there was too much emphasis on the sort of the sectarian approach as about looking for the sort of pan-Iraqi situation, in the way the Americans were approaching reconstruction?
Well, it was more than the reconstruction. It was the attempt to establish a new Iraqi government. So it was highly political. I thought, and the UK approach was behind this all the way, that the Iraqis needed to be both consulted and indeed groomed and brought to the point where they could start taking decisions for the administration of Iraq, and that they need to be quite closely on board for the political process that we followed.
And what role did you play in ensuring that happened? Because you were obviously operating in a very subtle manner in terms of trying to influence it. Did you actually succeed in changing the views?
Well, if you hit a small hiccup, as I did on my 3rd day with Bremer, that he wasn't going to easily accept political advice, you think of other ways to operate. And one of those ways that I chose was to have my own relationship with members of the Iraqi Governing Council, primarily to persuade them to go along with the American plan. So my first duty was always loyalty to the American plan, but to explore with them their alternative thoughts if they wanted to bring them, and some of them clearly had other ways of approaching these questions, and to try and handle those to see if they could be dealt with without deviating from the American plan, and to make my own judgments on how far the 7 Steps plan was going to work. And separately, within the CPA itself, I was constantly talking, as were my close advisors, with the American political team, with other parts of the CPA machine. We thought what the administrator wanted was going to work in practice, whether we should put forward separate advice. So you do an increasing multiple of things to get through to a good sense approach to the administration of Iraq, even if the administrator isn't quite there yet. And that's the way you operate.
So within the constraints, you were finding room to maneuver to actually develop your own strategies for making sure that you did exert influence, and you were keeping UK informed of all of that.
Yes, I was always pretty frank and open with my reports to London of how I thought things were going, including reporting that conversation with Jerry Bremer. Can I bring another point in here? Coming back to best case scenarios, Jem, it was very clear to me, even before I got to Baghdad, that the United States had been working on and continued to work on the best case scenario, that they could administer Iraq and turn it back to Iraqis who could administer Iraq with the lowest possible input of resources and troops, and in the most direct way possible. And they didn't insure against things other than the best case scenario, with a higher number of troops or with alternative political plans. Ambassador Bremer was responding to the Pentagon in trying to run a best case scenario approach, and that's why he didn't want alternative plans. But when I talked to other members of the American team, when I talked informally to the military, to the intelligence agencies, to other people who were operating, I found a very much more gloomy prognosis of what was going on than I felt or understood Ambassador Bremer was reporting back to the Pentagon.